I'm Igor Siddiqui, Program Director for Interior Design and Associate Professor here at the School of Architecture, for those of you that don't know me. It's my pleasure to introduce today's lecture by Alex Schweder. This semester, Alex is teaching an advanced interior design studio at our school as the Dr. Panak Kwallek Endowed Chair in Design and Planning. Alex pursued a PhD in the Department of Architecture at Cambridge and holds professional architecture degrees from Pratt and Princeton. He's a fellow at the American Academy in Rome, and he also teaches in the interior design department at Pratt. In 2007, he coined the term performance architecture to describe the inflatables, occupied structures, and domestic renovations that focus on subjectivity rather than materiality resulting from his creative practice. His works have been collected and exhibited internationally, including the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, Performa 17, the Tel Aviv Art Museum, and the Tate Britain. And this is just a small sample of the many things Alex has done out there in the world. In his talk today, Schweder will be discussing how architecture can be made using methodologies developed in performance art by presenting works from his practice. His engagement with questions of subjectivity, a demonstrated interest in making and craft at the scale of the body, his contribution to our understanding of expanded practice in design, as well as his extensive experience as a design educator, are among the many reasons why we're so happy that he's able to join our faculty this semester. So please help me in welcoming Alex Schweder.
Thank you, Igor. I just want to make sure that everyone can still hear me. We did a little bit of a test. And I'd like to thank you, Igor, for inviting me to teach here. I'd like to thank you, Clay, for being my lecture person. And I'd like to really, really super thank my students, who I have to say are like top notch. So thank you guys, everyone who's out there. I'm super excited to get class. Everyone here has been so warm and welcoming. Thank you, Amy, my co-instructor. I'm just pumped to be here. Like if I had a tail, it would be wagging right now. So I'm going to talk about this term performance architecture, which, as Igor mentioned, I'm going to turn this off if I can. There we go. As Igor mentioned, this is a term that I came up with to describe what I was doing. And it's changed in meaning for me over time. It started out as a kind of, I was trained as an architect, always. I've practiced as an architect. I've built buildings and done all the things. But all of a sudden, I sort of found myself really more interested in performance art and in the histories of performance art, not because it seemed cool, but because it seemed familiar. Right? It was very, very familiar, these ways of thinking about space. As soon as you write living room on a floor plan or auditorium on a floor plan, you know what you do. You sit there, you watch something. It kind of ascribes an action to a space. And performance artists, I found, were really using this kind of action in space idea to ask questions, rather than to kind of reinforce our assumptions about what we do in space. So there's a kind of, you kind of work towards the unknown. And as Igor mentioned, there's a question of methodology. And it kind of, I've been asked for decades, like, are you an architect? Are you an artist? What's the difference between the two? And, I try and sidestep that question as much as possible. But the way I've started thinking about that is it's more about a way of working towards something than it is in any sort of outcome, right? So I describe what I do as making architecture through performance art methodologies. And that means that I work towards the unknown, right? If I'm uncomfortable, and I'm sure, I hope this is helpful to my students, if I know I'm uncomfortable, if I feel uncomfortable, I know I'm doing the right thing, right? Because You're kind of like working towards something and you discover it. You start with an idea and then you let it go. It's not about a kind of linear solving of a problem. We think about subjects and objects, right? Subjects, we, and then the object of the building. I've started to see those two things as very, very blurry. And I love form. I love, you know, a really well-crafted space. But more so, I'm interested in new relationships that are possible, new subjectivities that are possible, things that are queer. And I use that term very, very broadly. You know, it's not just about subjectivity. It's not just about sexuality. It's really about strangeness in this kind of way that it's not familiar, let's say. So thinking about the kinds of subjectivities that are possible through space, you know, what relationships, what new relationships. And so that's where I'm going to start my talk. I've divided this talk, knowing that I only have 50 minutes, into occupations and inflations. And the first set of works here really are about the ways that buildings kind of produce subjectivity, produce relationships, produce what we are unfamiliar with. So this was, when I was in Rome, I met a guy named Ward Shelley. And Ward and I are about as different as chalk and cheese. Ward's maybe 20 years older than I am. He describes himself as a kind of hippie. We have very different aesthetics. So there's a lot of kind of like tension when we work together. And we've worked together for a very long time, very, very happily, and quite productively. And we came up with this project called Flatland, which is a kind of riff on a science fiction novel from the 1800s, where we built a 2-foot wide building that was 4 stories tall. There were 6 of us living in it for 3 weeks without leaving. The only rule was that if you leave, you can't come back in. That was the only rule. But then other rules started kind of forming. We started to kind of like, oh, you know, this guy, he's leaving all of his coffee cups and then someone kicks it and it runs down on my, so, you know, you have to be cleaner, you have to be this, you have to be that. There was just this kind of tension that always occurs, but because it was 2 feet wide, we could never get in a circle and talk to each other about stuff. So it's like half the group left in 10 days, right? And then it didn't actually feel bigger because we would never go into their space. But that's actually the opposite of what I imagined would happen. When we first started conceiving of it like a shoe, and you wear it for a while, it gets a little bigger here, you get a bunion there. But actually, it was exerting forces on us. It was, it was kind of constructing who we are. And that's the thing that people couldn't really see. You know, that's the thing that the audience would come in and they wouldn't know what the relationships were. They would think, oh, this is a cool space, but they wouldn't, we didn't know what we were doing yet in terms of like really focusing on the subjectivity that arises from buildings. And so the next work, this one's called Counterweight Roommate. We wanted to make sure that as soon as someone walked in and looked at what we were doing, they would know what it was about. In terms of like a kind of first impression. So this is a 5-story version of what's now a 7-story building. There's the bathroom at the bottom, the kitchen at the top, kind of sleeping working space on levels 2 and 4, and then in the middle on level 3, there's a living room where we can meet, because we are tied together by a rope that goes up over the building onto our waist, and we need to use each other as kind of counterweights to get up and down. This one we lived in for 5 days. It was at a kind of art fair. And I have a huge fear of heights. So I was like super white knuckling it, right? I was like, oh, Ward, please don't go to the bathroom because, you know, oh, then I have to go to the kitchen. I know that sounds a little, see what I mean, queer, really weird. there was this kind of other thing that arose from this, which is more about like, and then Ward is someone who likes to, he's got this idea of himself, and these are his words, these are not me ascribing them to him, I would never want to do that. But he describes himself as someone who likes to not depend on other people, and he doesn't like to let other people down. That's kind of like how he imagines himself, and this work kind of messed with that notion of his self, because in order to go to the bathroom, he would have to inconvenience me. So there was always the unknown. This piece, what we realized is we wanted to visualize and enact cooperation, but what we wound up doing was enacting caretaking. We were caring for one another. Like no one else could see it. A kind of highlight when MoMA bought this work, and we're still waiting for them to install it, but it's pretty big, so it's it's going to be a while. But this project on it, I'm gonna kind of move through this because I decided that for today's talk we're going to do a lot. Great, Kevin's coming to turn my sound down. Thank you, Kevin. So, this. There we go. Oh, that's nice. That's good. Thank you. Okay. So this house is basically a 2-bedroom apartment. There's a bed on the outside of the wheel and a bed on the inside of the wheel that are 180 degrees apart from one another. So each of the functions of living, kind of a comfortable chair, a desk, the kitchen and bathroom. As we walk and into the next bag, and the weight of the water would keep the box upright, so that you would never kind of like dump the bathroom on the other guy's head. And we lived like this for 10 days without leaving, right? Idea of caretaking, and we leave with a different idea. We leave with there's a kind of discovery that happens. Usually we build all of these works ourselves, and then by the time the opening comes around, we're exhausted and we're just happy to be there, happy to have a little bit of a chance to relax. And then by maybe the 3rd day, we're kind of like, we're stored enough to start really thinking about what's going on. And we talk to each other. We also talk to our audiences, right? That's a kind of difference in our practice. So in a minute, you'll see a big crowd of folks. And there's an idea about this kind of fourth wall. Do you talk to people? Are you there to kind of perform and look serious and pretend no one else is there? But the thing about buildings and space and kind of publicness is that it's not just about us. So it's about our audiences. They have a different view of what we're doing that we don't have access to. And so by talking to everyone who comes to visit us, yeah, there's Ward working his computer. So all these folks, they're able to see us in ways that we can't see ourselves. So in these exchanges, that's where we start to build meaning. It's in the conversations. We don't write stuff down. That seems to be, what that does in our mind is it kind of privileges our voice over the voice of those conversations. That becomes the authoritative history. Someone will look back to that and say, oh yeah, this is what this is about. Rather, we like to have it, I like to think about them as oral histories, right? Those things that are changing over time as they get retold. That it's not the best for the history books, or for the archives, but that's, that feels right to us. That feels like the most appropriate way to think about those who come to visit us. And from this work, we start to think about, we were really thinking about this turning. We were thinking about floating. We were thinking about the fact that there was, when we tried to set up caretaking with this work, we were thinking about two people needing to overcome an adversity. But the feedback that we got was that it was about cooperation, right? There were all sorts of other readings that, about a kind of like daily grind and stuff like that are fine, but that's not how we see it. We don't want to shut down any voices. So that, let's see, here we go. That led to, these led to more ideas for other works about a kind of adversity, or works that are kind of negotiating a difficulty. So the next work, we wanted to really visualize this experience that we had. So you can see that these works are really kind of cumulative and building upon past discoveries that we make. This one is called Your Turn. And I lived on one side of a wall and Ward lived on the other side of the wall. And I don't know if any of you have seen Brazil, but there's a moment in the movie Brazil where there's like one desk and the ceilings are incredibly high, and the protagonist puts the books down, starts to sit down to work, and then they fall down because the guy on the other side of the wall has just tried to get a little bit more, right? It's kind of like that elbow armrest on the airplane I took this morning. You're like, oh, maybe I'll stake that out. So this work, I'm gonna like I said, I have a lot of videos, so I'm just gonna kind of hurry through the pictures because I think the videos kind of tell this story pretty well. Here we go. So we were, again, we work with very familiar motifs. We work with domestic spaces because everyone can recognize a domestic space. By using domestic space, it allows anyone who comes to see us a kind of familiarity with the work. Like, oh, I know what that is. That's the kitchen I've cooked. So it makes it a little bit easier for people to imagine themselves being in these projects. And what we would do is we would slide these functions back and forth all day long. So there's enough for everyone, just not at the same time, right? So that we just kind of, here, oh, there's Ward pushing over the dining table to me. This one we lived on for 10 days, and we would just kind of move around. So we were thinking about this idea of sharing, about a kind of agreement of resources, that you need to take turns at using whatever it is. And what we thought would come out of that was a kind of appreciation for the other person. But what wound up happening is that we started to read stuff, we started to read meaning into things that weren't there. So, for example, if Ward shoves the bathroom over to my side too loudly, I'm like, oh, why are you being so, it's like someone slamming the door behind them. Why are you angry? What did I do? So and then we're both a little hard of hearing. Hearing isn't our strong suit. And so communicating or talking to each other also became a problem. Like we were mishearing, we would have to yell in order to hear across this wall. So always yelling at someone for 10 days is a little, these things just add up. And it's a result of the spaces that we designed, right? And it's not like we had an idea that we were trying to illustrate. We wanted to kind of enter into this situation and see what happens. You notice Ward's getting into the bathroom, and in this work and in works hereafter, the bathroom is always blue. We wanted to give it this kind of distinctive color so that we can always point to it, because that's the first question that we always get asked. Is there a bathroom in there? And it's in a way, there's a kind of cadence in the voices of those that ask that's like, I'm going to trip you up. Where's the bathroom? And, they're being a little cheeky at the time. They think it's funny. And it is funny. Bathrooms are funny places. But what we came to realize through this piece was that what people are actually asking you is can we trust you? Can we trust you? Can we trust the fact that you're really living here? That if there's a bathroom, then that means that you don't need to take a break and go down, like go around the bookshop and there's the bathroom. They're able to trust us for when we're staying there in the museum overnight, that we're not leaving this thing, that we don't have to leave, that we've got everything, and that we're following through on our proposition. So that's a kind of interesting insight about questions that people have about cheekiness and about trust. I'm gonna kind of move on to the next work because I want to follow on that theme of trust. This is a work that we were similarly working with the idea of adversity. This is 2016, your turn was 2017, so this is kind of the same era. We were still interested in this, sometimes we are asked to do multiple things at one time, and we're still interested. So we had we had these two opportunities, and you never know what's going to get canceled, so you just do what you're most interested at the time. And with this one is our first outdoor piece. This is one that just sits outdoors all the time. It was supposed to be installed for 2 years. It's still there 7 years later. It's called Reactor, and it's in upstate New York at a place called Art Oh My. And it's a house that's balanced on a single point. So there's this single column in the middle, and there's a living space on this side, and one on that side, and then here's the bathroom in the middle. You can tell because it's blue, and blue means you can trust me. On the other side is yellow, and we wanted to paint these two rooms different colors so that you would because it's the only way you could really tell that the thing is spun around. And it spins in the wind. There's no electricity in it. That was a kind of decision that we made. We could have installed solar panels. One of the things that, there's plumbing, there's a toilet, there's running water. It's all kind of gravity fed. We have to bring it in. One of the things that, especially with a work like this, is we don't want to confuse the exploration that we're pursuing with a solution, right? This isn't about a solution. This isn't about a new way of living. So we didn't want to take that extra step to make it look like a house. We wanted that kind of untethering from the electrical grid to be more about like, no, this isn't really that kind of proposal. I'm gonna fast forward. So the house moves with our weight, and it spins around in the wind as well. And so here we can, I think the video, as I was putting this talk together, I really decided to focus on the videos. Usually I just show the pictures and I talk over the pictures, and we've got these videos. So, and I think that there's something to them. So thanks for bearing with this rethinking of things. So this is getting a sense of what the surroundings are like. It's at the top of a hill, and when we were thinking about this work, it was this same adversity thing as your turn, which is the wall. And we were thinking that there would need to be, we were thinking that there might need to be a sail, and that we would need to collaborate to work against this thing, the wind, right? This this element that's out of our control. And so we were thinking that that's what might bring us together. And the project just worked so well, like it works better than we deserve. It just sort of spins with a gentle breeze. It doesn't take much to move it because it's perfectly balanced. And this was a big surprise because this work actually forced us apart. It didn't force us apart, but it sort of tempted us apart. Let's put it that way, because it seduced us apart. That's a word I try and catch myself with when I'm talking about space. Spaces can't force anyone to do anything, really. you know, and as designers, we can't really do that. I don't think, at least in my experience, I've never been able to force anyone to do something through a building I've made. The decks were just so beautiful. You know, they were just so pleasant to be in that we actually moved apart. We didn't see each other much for 10 days, right? We were just on we were doing our own thing. You know, here I am reading or texting or something. And then, you know, maybe we would meet for dinner, and then it's bedtime at 8, and then you go to sleep, and then the sun wakes you up. And so this other rhythm was unexpected, but there were, you know, in all of the other works, there was this real relationship, and this was actually something that pushed us apart. This was something that dissolved an interest in one another, or a need for one another, or a dependency, or a friction. Which surprised us, and we don't know what to do with this, you know, because once you're pushed apart, what to do? And so anyway, so this kind of is something that we're still processing in terms of its meaning, in terms of where to go with this next. I will say, and you've probably noticed this, and I'm going to set up what I think is the next project that I'm going to show. You can see that it's just two of us. After Flatland, it was just two of us. There were 6 people in Flatland and 2 people throughout. And it became just about us. You know, it just became about these 2 guys. And, you know, you can remark on, you know, that this is one voice, and we wanted to bring in other voices. You know, there was a criticality of like, oh, we're kind of in a feedback loop with just the 2 of us here, and we want to bring in some new voices. So some of the next works really that you'll see are about kind of breaking this two-ness. I'm going to just move on from here, just in the acknowledgement that time exists. Yeah, here we go. So this is a project called The Newcomers that was also in 2017. Can you guys in the back hear me okay? Yeah? Okay, because I'm kind of wandering around and projecting different places. This is work where we had an idea about working toward need. For this one, this is for Performa, which is a performance art biennial in New York City. And each one of these yellow cones has food in it. So we built a little house on the first day, and we moved in. This is November, New York City, right near Wall Street, right near the Occupy Wall Street location. And so each night, you can see this is on day 2. Here's day 1, day 2. You can see the difference. And here's day 5. It looks a little bit different each day. There's the 4 of us. So this is Lena Kuvela and Sarah Burns, who joined Ward and I to build this. And each day, someone else got to be the designer, because we would take it apart as soon as we got up. We would unscrew the tarp. We would fold things away. We would take down our kitchen, and we would build a bridge to get to the next food, right? So the house turned into a bridge every day, and then back into a house designed by another one of us. So we each got to be the designer twice of whatever this component of things looked like. And we had to keep building because that's where our food was. At least that's the story, right? And then there's no real end to it. You know, at the end, we just kind of rented a U-Haul and drove away. So it wasn't really about an arrival. It was really about, like, you know, some of the comments were, since it was wintertime, well, that's a really difficult way to hang Christmas lights up, because we would just kind of mark this like a snail trail. We thought, you know, let's put some lights up so that they can see where we started and see where we've been. More kind of shots of that. Again, talking to people, getting feedback from those who come to see us. There was, you know, this was a very, very public space where you just had, you know, sort of school kids at certain times of the day, business people coming and going from work, eating their lunch, residents who would come walk their dogs at night. Here's the sort of nighttime shots. And then it just got kind of taken away once we got, there's a quick time-lapse video of that work. It rained, it was cold, but we were all pretty happy. And it's, you know, again, this is another one of those pieces where we're still trying to figure out what does that mean. And I really think it's more about the group and about what kind of friendships or communities formed in doing this strange thing and needing to kind of work together. That idea kind of led to this next work when we were given the opportunity to build something in Luxembourg. So this is an aerial view of the site we were given. It's a hedge maze, which is a strange thing it was built maybe 10 years ago, so it's a kind of strange thing to build in a city. And we thought, Ward likes to describe our work as doing a simple thing in a difficult way. So we had this idea about moving through the maze, right? And so we built this object that looked kind of like a Trojan thing. You know, it's not really a horse, maybe it's a Trojan boat. And we started at one end of the hedge maze. You can kind of see that all the way up in the upper left corner, and then we ended in the lower right corner. And we took the parts of the Trojan thing apart and used all the pieces to get from one side to the other. So here's just a short clip of that. So each one of these panels would be put down to make the bridge. It was thickly full of materials inside, and we had to kind of improvise our way across. And then once we got to the other side, we started putting it back together. Thus, slow teleport. It took 10 days to teleport from one side to the next. And we were just working all the time. It was one of those pieces where unlike other works, except for I would say the newcomers in this work shared the need to continuously work. And so we didn't really get a chance to reflect on what does this mean and observe how are we changing. It was just more about just interrupting our thought patterns with Clemens and Matthew. Clemens Klein and Matthew Brown were the two other people that we invited into this work. There's Matthew working. And people would come to see us. We would build little embellishments in order to talk to them. And it was more about forming a community than it is. Once you have two people, you can kind of make polemics or assumptions. But once you have 3, 4, 5, 6, it's harder to really claim what that relationship is, the difference is between beginning and end, at least for us. I'm not saying that as any sort of objective truth. It's just what happened for us. So here we are kind of moving towards number 9 and 10 and pulling it up. We tried to, we left a couple of these, again, these yellow things were our food. We wanted to give people a sense of orientation so that if they came to us on the first day, they're unlikely to come back. This is kind of an out of the way part of the city. So we wanted them to have a sense of where we started and where we would go, even if the whole bridge wasn't there. So that at least we can point to things and tell people what we're doing. And here we are. This is the sort of refashioned Trojan thing. I'm going to switch over to inflations, and I'm going to check the time just to see how we're doing. It's one. Okay, good. I'm on time. So I'm going to switch into these. So I met Ward in 2007, and that's when we started to do we started to build this. This is kind of, it was like 2005, 2006 when I started to realize that performance and architecture and design and space had real overlaps and real possibilities for joining the two. And I started working on inflatables in Rome. I met Ward in Rome, and that's, I sort of think from here that the Flatland was when the term performance architecture was coined. The inflatables started as a way of speeding buildings up to a pace that you can kind of understand them as a performance, you know, that you can see them change, that you can see difference in space and shifts in space. It's not quite so slow. And based on one of the experiments that I was doing in Rome, I made this work. It's called A Sack of Rooms All Day Long. And it's basically this 4 rooms of an 800 square foot house stuffed into the skin of a 500 square foot house. And all of the lines of these rooms and the skin are drawn with these kind of different line weights at the seams of the inflatables. And so, let's see, hopefully this will, there we go. So, they inflate, they kind of push up, and then at a certain point, the outer skin becomes a restraint for these 4 things. And the living room starts to steal space from the dining room, starts to steal space from the kitchen, from the entry in the bathroom. And, you know, it just kind of rides. It just rides all day long. And as I was in the museum, I was listening to, you know, is kind of early on, and I was pretty chuffed to have people come see my work. So I spent a lot of time just loitering and listening, as one does. And the comment that I kept hearing was, well, oh man, how do I get in? How do I get in? Because it's full scale. You know, it's something like 20 feet by 30 feet or something like that. And based on those comments, based on that listening, I started to think, oh, I should really let people in. You know, if we think about it, I kind of bumbled my way into an artistic practice. You know, I've been rethinking my notions of what art is, what architecture is, what interior design is, as I've been going along, and it's changed quite a bit. But you know, when I first started, it was a performance was something that you went to look at. You might go to see it rather than participate in it. A sculpture was something that you walked around and saw. These works, once you start letting people in, have a different relationship to a viewer. Once you allow people in here, it becomes closer to a kind of, a more something that you can't behold at once, something that you need to enter in order to understand. And I started to think about the ways that architecture and interior design give cues for how to perform the thing that's written on the floor plan, right? How do I perform a doorway? I took something super simple, not to complicate it. This one is made from two sacs of air, 2 sort of arches of air that continuously pass air back and forth to each other. You know, it's always sucking the air from one to the other, from one to the other. And by doing so, it changes the instruction, either pass through or remain separate. But you know, these 2 kind of states of one or the other are much less interesting to me than the transition, than this gooiness. My sort of first attraction to inflatables, oops, I'm going the wrong way. I think we can just, My first attraction to inflatables was about a body, was about seeing my body in buildings. For this one, you quite literally see your body in this building. This is glow-in-the-dark fur, so you can see that once the lights turn off, an image of myself is left on the surface of the habitable area, the furry area, and then it switches. One form, like almost like a pop-up book, pushes the other out of the way, and kind of sits, and so they change. They change like a pop-up book. And this kind of gooiness, this kind of changing, roiling, messiness is more, and I've told this to my students, so sorry guys for repeating myself again and again. You've heard a little bit of this now. It is really about the body I have as opposed to the body I would like to have, right? They're making sounds that I would rather they didn't. They're not sort of plumping up. They're like sagging, and they're like bulging, and it's just, they're just weird. They're just become this, but that feels more recognizable to me than this kind of idealized body that is in. One can really trace the history of the same ideal young white male body throughout the history of architecture. Whether it's in the caryatids in Greece, or the cruciform plan in cathedrals, or Le Corbusier's modular man, this kind of repetition of this idea that becomes a way of proportioning buildings, designing the kind of spatial relationships around an idea of perfection. I like the goo. This is a work that I did in Tel Aviv. This is the one I did in Tel Aviv. It's called wall-to-wall, floor-to-ceiling. It's made up of 6 white inflatables on the ceiling and 6 gray inflatables on the floor. And I wanted to have the sense that the floor and the ceiling were having this back and forth conversation, that this space is maybe 120 feet by 40 feet, but it's only 9 feet tall, so it's kind of compressed already, and I wanted to kind of work with that idea of compression. And so you can see here that they're oriented in sort of perpendicular to one another. So the gray ones on the right, you can see they're going this way, and the white ones are this way, and they reverse. So when one inflates, you can pass through it in one direction, and then the white inflates and the other direction is now accessible. So it's not like there's one better or worse way to go. There's just simply difference. So it's always changing. And I wanted to have these forms also give some instructions, just like I was talking about. The doorways give you an instruction to pass through in the snowballing doorway work. These works give you opportunities to lay down, to, let's see, to pass through like a door. There are places to sit. And so the instructions are always changing. So the way the space is scored, so this door will be here one moment and then gone. And fur became a way of getting people to play. I love fur just kind of per se. It's all faux fur, so. And really wanting people to kind of touch and interact with these forms. Once you make them soft and furry, that's, it's almost like an invitation. It's just a way of saying, hey, this is a little nicer over here, come on. So again, with this next work called Slowly, this is called Davenport's Yawn, the version of this. And it's got 2 furry sofas in the middle of these, this kind of inflating carpet. So the carpet turns into a hallway, and the beds turn into, the sofas turn into a bed. And so imagine this inflation, this business here takes about 15 minutes. And so you're invited to lay down. There are pillows at either end of this. So, it's kind of placed for your head to rest well. And as you're laying down and your body is slowly, slowly, slowly rotating for 15 minutes, all of a sudden you're facing a stranger and you're in bed with them, right? You're like face to face. And it produces this very kind of heightened awareness. It's like you don't know what to do. Again, I'm evaluating this well, I mean, I clearly, I can't say that I don't pay attention to the form because that would be disingenuous. But what I'm really excited about, what surprises me more than the form, are the relationships. And I didn't actually expect this kind of weirdness. When I've installed it, people have been, that's the thing that they remark most on, is that's the memory. You know, first there's this kind of strange feeling of your body turning so slowly. And then, but then once you're there, once you're face to face with that other person, it becomes what you take away. I'm going to go a little bit more quickly because I think I want to get on to some of the, yeah, I've got some more videos that I want to show you. So these works, this work is called The Sound in the Future, and it's designed for a dance floor. I found that the best dance floor is a small dance floor, and it takes a very early techno track by Jeff Mills called The Bells, and it slows it down to 1/10 of its original speed, so it's almost like a Buto techno kind of thing. It's very, very slow, and I'm showing this work because it's got this, we'll be able to hear this in just a sec. I think it's coming up. Here we go, right? There, let's see. I think this does it. We'll just see how slow that actually is. It's really slow. Okay, there we go. So that's the sound, that's the techno sound, that kind of boom, boom, boom. And so this kind of, it was designed for a space in Detroit, which is the home, one home of techno. As the automobile industry started to kind of be outsourced to robots, artists started making sounds. That's the birth of techno. That's one birth of techno. So I was really interested in this history. And so I wanted, you know, making this kind of giant dancing robot, this thing that's always reconfiguring the dance floor, is what that's about. I mentioned the sound in this work because that's really where my interest has grown in inflatables. This is a commission that I got in Munich. It's called Sense Factory, and I worked with a number of artists on this piece. Sissel Tolas developed the scent, and the sound was developed by a German noise. He comes from a band called Einstürzen Neubauten, and his name is FM Einheit. And so he did the sound, she did the scent, but our work was so siloed. It was like, you do your thing, I do my thing, and we'll see how they, you know, like, we'll see how, you know, it's as though, okay, Igor, you go in that room, you develop a dance. Amy, you develop this other dance, and we'll all kind of like, we'll see what we get when we dance together. Rather than really something where that dance is something that happens between us, right? It's about that in-between state. It's not in either of us. It's what happens in relation. And I'm going to pass through this really quickly because I can't wait to show you guys the breath before. These are some interiors of the spaces. It was a huge piece. People were pushed around. People were shoved. It smelled. You heard the soundtrack. But I was so frustrated by the fact that, you know, you do your thing and I do my thing. And so I started working with sound artists to rethink these inflatables as sonic instruments, as things that can be composed, because there's always a sound, as my class knows, right? There's always a sound of this fan. The sound artist I worked with on this one is Mieko Suzuki. She's a Berlin-based DJ, and she was saying, oh, okay. She works a lot with field recordings. She said, oh my God, Alex, these fans are so loud. I should be really loud. I'm going to be really loud. So what she did was she took a contact mic and she put it on the motor, and then fed those 3 feeds into a computer, gave each column a note. These columns are maybe 21 feet tall, 4 feet wide, and they inflate with it. Well, we'll see in a second. Anyway, they get fed back out through this wall of subwoofers. So it's like, vroom, you know, it just really comes at you. And here's this gives you a sense, hopefully. I should not start my videos on black anymore, right? See if this does it. There we go. Excuse me. So in addition to developing this large sound of the fans and the motors, Mieko also hooked another contact mic up to the fabric. And the fabric, as it's unfolding, makes this kind of uncrumpling sound. And that sound then gets fed out. So 2 of these columns have lights at the end, and one has a speaker that's directional. So it's a directional speaker is one where sound is produced in a line, and that line, so these guys can hear it over here, but not everybody else. And if you move it across, you hear it going past you. It becomes a very spatial thing. And the space that this was installed in has a 17-meter dome at the top. The height from the floor to the ceiling was 17 meters. And as a dome, if you bounce sound off of a curved surface, you can never identify the source. You can never really hear. So there's this thing that's moving all around you, and you don't know where it's coming from. So there's the dome. This is one of the, I think that's one of the light ones. So these columns with the light just sort of mounted at the top were licking the walls. You know, the light was just kind of like moving over them, creating these great shadows. I had in mind Pasolini's, I think it's Pasolini, or I think it's Pasolini. I could be wrong. I'm terrible with names, as I've said many times. Roma. And so these motorini going around Piazza Navona and casting the shadow of the horses of the fountain on the walls of the piazza was a kind of image that I wanted to sort of riff on for these. So you see these, they just like rise and fall. The falling is quite slow. You can control their movement just by like giving a little bit more air, turning it down, and then that also has an effect on the sound. So there's this kind of, this work did what the last work didn't, you know, like, and that one experiment, one kind of pursuit will hopefully wind up in another idea, even if it's not what you wanted at the beginning. So this is kind of where this work is going, and I think I have time for just a couple of more quick things. I started during the pandemic. I couldn't show my work anymore, so I started making animations and started thinking about, this one is scored by Geneva Skeen, and I had this idea about feedback. So you see there's a microphone on either end of these inflatables, and as they move towards and away from the speakers, it creates a kind of feedback loop. So this is a kind of experiment that I was able to do to kind of visualize some ideas that I was thinking about without having to build them. More ideas of things that you might be able to do, sort of material experiments. You guys know by now that fur and silver are kind of in my, they're enticing. I'll just put it that way. So thinking about, again, going back to this idea of two things sharing one breath of air and just passing that air back and forth. And kind of, sucking it from one another, this kind of idea of an exchange. And so these kind of animations, an instrument, and I worked with a different sound artist for each of these pieces. Geneva Skeen, again, did the fur. Each one of these makes a sound. A good friend of mine, Carrie Mae Weems, was the vocalist on the disco ball. She was saying the name of the piece, Her Joy, Her Joy, Her Joy, over and over and over again. It was just this mantra of her joy happening over and over again. And as the disco ball would deflate, that voice would get muffled. There's the speaker, so it would be her joy, her joy, her joy, her joy. So again, it's the thing itself becomes the instrument, even if the sound is recorded and it's not being produced in that way live. There was the final piece in this was augmented. There's a sort of a mass of milk floating in the middle of the room, and it would bubble, and it would. I'm gonna go quickly through this one because I know we're pushing up against time here. I'm gonna just see if I can't forward because I hate hearing my own voice on this one. Let's see. So that's that kind of beat that you hear. Oh man, I think I can. Yeah, this is torture for me, you guys. I'm dying up here, absolutely dying. So you can hear this piece. I commit you guys, sorry, just so that you know how I feel up here. Okay, I think I can just kind of click. Kind of realizing some ideas that were animated with the fur and the mirrors. I'm really much more interested in what the mirrors do on the wall than I am with any sort of disco ball as a thing. Again, it's a way in. It's a ball as a thing. Again, it's a way in. It's a kind of familiar. It's a familiar. We're getting to the milk. There we go. Let's see. There's a good cue. Okay. So there's the video of the milk, and you can only see it through a phone or an iPad, but the sound was always there. I wanted there to be. So I think of this also as an inflatable, this animation as being something that's in space. And as you walk around the room, with these new AR technologies, you can place a thing in a room and then walk around it, have a kind of ambulatory experience of something that's not really there, except you can hear it, so it is there. So it's this kind of like, yeah. Yeah. Anyway, I don't want to ascribe too much meaning. I'd rather you do it. And I'm going to just say thank you. Thank you all.